Aliens warned us about the end of the world, but only a few can hear the message.
June 21st, 1976. A young pilot takes off. 15 minutes later, he disappears.
Rafael was the student number 82 from the Mexican School for Pilots.
He was supposed to fly over Chimalhuacan and the pyramids, but before landing, he disappeared. A search and rescue order was emitted to find Rafael, the pilot of the XBCOX.
Around 11 a.m. at the International Airport of Acapulco,
Carlos, an air traffic controller, received a call through the frequency 118.5 that changed his life.
Control Tower Acapulco. We are the aircraft XBZOX. You also know them as Cessna 150.
Carlos didn't understand why the pilot said you also know them as, when he as a pilot also knew them as Cessna 150. The other strange aspect was that the pilot spoke in a robotic tone, Carlos following protocol.
Asked where the aircraft was flying, Rafael, the pilot, continued.
You are talking to extraterrestrial beings. The pilot of the aircraft XBZOX is flying under a hypnotic state. We are using his vocal cords to communicate with you. He doesn't realize he's being controlled by us. Should contact you.
Carlos, astonished, asked again for the whereabouts of the aircraft.
He's flying south of the airport over the sea.
Carlos asked, where are they?
We are parked over your airport at 85,000 feet.
Carlos knew there were no airplanes that flew at that altitude. He also knew the XBCOX
could not fly over 15,000 feet.
So he looked through the window trying to spot their aircraft. The pilot, Rafael, told Carlos,
go back to your seat. You won't be able to see us, so you shouldn't try finding us.
Carlos realizes they are able to see what he is doing, which means they are able to see him from 85,000 feet and through the walls, not to mention any cloud or object that could be between them. I wonder what else could they see or know. For starters, Rafael asked,
we don't want to interfere with air traffic. Could we be changed to another frequency and also not be recorded?
Carlos explained it was a calm day and they were not interfering, but they insisted. So Carlos transferred them to the frequency used by the bus drivers, which wasn't officially recorded.
At this point, Carlos was convinced he was having a paranormal experience.
Don't you wonder how aliens are able to do all that?
As I studied the case, I kept on thinking how they had control over Rafael's body. How Rafael was being used as a microphone and speaker without him knowing. Don't you find this similar to a possession?
What do you mean similar to a possession?
Like Emily's Rose case, a person behaves in a way they never would. In Emily's case, the demons possessing her had to be confronted. In Rafael's case, the extraterrestrials immediately said it was them controlling Rafael.
How they were extraterrestrials from another world.
Carlos wanted to know from which world. They answered,
we are from any world. It doesn't matter. We travel throughout the universe.
Carlos asked how they knew Spanish. They claimed,
we are able to speak the language of the planet or of any other.
Carlos, not convinced, asked his next question in German. They answered in English.
While this was going on, another pilot contacted that control tower. This pilot
was flying between 4 and 5 miles to the east of the airport.
Is your aircraft flying over the sea, the XBCOX? I'm the principal and owner of the Mexican School for Pilots. The XBCOX belongs to the school in Mexico City. So why is it in Acapulco? What's going on?
Carlos said, if the principal doesn't know why his aircraft is here, how am I supposed to know? The XBCOX contacted us and we're giving instructions to it.
I also need landing instructions.
As soon as the principal landed, he went into the control tower and not believing what was happening.
He said that the XBCOX, or Cessna 150, it's a very small aircraft with a tiny fuel tank. Its flying area was very limited.
And if the pilot was Rafael,
there was no way he had made it to Acapulco, all the way from Chimalhuacan. They had activated
a search and rescue alert
to find a plane. Everyone had thought he had crashed. The principal asked for a phone to call Mexico City and cancel the search and rescue alert.
Rafael hadn't crashed. He had reached Acapulco somehow.
Did you know that to go from Mexico City to Acapulco, you have to fly over Chilpancingo?
Which is covered with mountains. This meant Rafael had to be flying at least at 13,000 feet.
But Rafael had never flown at that height.
He only knew how to fly up to 8,000 feet.
Not to mention the mountains that surround Mexico City.
Anyway, the extraterrestrials continued a conversation in Spanish with Carlos, claiming they had the ability of mimicry.
What is mimicry?
Their ability to modify their structure at a molecular and atomic level. They also claim to have the power to become imperceptible.
In other words, they could decide if they wanted to be seen or not. Carlos asked why were they telling him all that. They said,
the world will face a terrible end. The countries are going to destroy each other, and there will be war.
Carlos asked why would they share this information with him instead of contacting a president or a secretary of defense. They told Carlos,
It is very difficult for us to establish a connection with anyone, but we can speak to you. If things get out of hand, we will intervene and save humanity.
They describe themselves as possible saviors of a complicated future. After 40 minutes of speaking with Carlos through Rafael's body, they said,
We want to suspend communications. We want for Rafael to be able to have a safe landing at the international airport of Acapulco.
Carlos asked when were they going to speak again.
Very soon, or maybe never again.
They couldn't tell this to Carlos because for them, time isn't a factor.
For them, time doesn't exist.
What do you think about this, Fed?
The fact they're able to manipulate molecules to an atomic level, the way they told Carlos not to look for them, and because they couldn't explain time in a way Carlos or any of us could understand, it makes me believe these so-called aliens are beings of the fifth dimension.
What do you mean fifth dimension? Why not fourth? Also, what convinced you about this?
The extraterrestrials Carlos spoke with are able to see through things, and also through time.
What do you mean they could see through time?
They were able to see the exact moments as we do, but they could also see the future, just as Griffin from Men in Black 3. But what convinced me that there are beings from a fifth dimension is their ability to manipulate with energy, for a lack of a better word, their own body, as they can also control others by establishing a telepathic connection.
What do you mean controlling their body with energy?
They told Carlos about this ability to mimic, and we could think they use advanced technology to do something like this. But my hypothesis is that they have a high level of awareness that makes them understand how to control the fluctuation of their own energy to change not only their shape but also the way they interact with light. They also spoke Spanish.
Understood German and answered in English.
This shows us that the way they communicate is by manipulating the information they send through their thoughts, which I'm going to call energy again.
I truly think among themselves, they don't use a language to talk because they don't need it. Anyways, Carlos wanted to know if they will talk again.
If the day comes, you will recognize our presence.
Communications were interrupted for a moment and reestablished at once, in the same frequency, just that this time the pilot was panicking.
I'm the 82. It's me, the 82.
Carlos asked him what he meant by this.
I'm the student number 82 from the Mexican School for Pilots. I want to know who I'm talking to and where am I flying?
Carlos asked for his location, realizing it was the first time he was talking with Rafael. Rafael said,
I don't know where I am. Who am I speaking to?
Rafael sounded worried and desperate.
Carlos told him
That he was speaking to the international airport in Acapulco. Rafael explained,
I took off at 8:15 from Mexico City. I was supposed to fly over Chimalhuacan and the pyramids. It is 11:30. I've been flying for 3 hours and now I'm flying over the sea. I don't know where I am or how I got here. I need instructions to land.
Carlos needed to know his location because he couldn't see him. He didn't know where he was, and back then, they didn't have radars that could detect him. Rafael said,
The only thing I see is water. What should I do? I need instructions.
Carlos told Rafael to get near the coast so he could provide landmarks.
I'm almost flying on land. Give me instructions.
What do you see?
The base to my right and the city to my left.
You are very close to the airport. The airport is located between the Bay of Acapulco and the lagoon.
I see the lagoon.
When Rafael found the airport, Carlos closed down the airport so no one would land and no one would take off. He provided Rafael with an emergency landing.
Rafael asked the control tower to make a report because no one was going to believe him.
Carlos explained they had been talking for the last 40 minutes. There was already a report made, and the authorities of the airport were listening in. They had taken record of everything. Rafael was able to land, and everyone who knew about this ran towards Rafael. The first one to talk to him was the airport medic.
He determined that Rafael wasn't under the influence of any drug and that he was healthy. A mechanic from Aeromexico was called to verify the fuel of the aircraft.
knowing the flight plan.
And the amount of fuel in the tank before departure. The mechanic determined that the aircraft hadn't spent any fuel.
This was a 3-hour trip of an aircraft that didn't have the fuel capacity to make it, with a pilot that wasn't able to fly the distance. But what didn't make sense to anyone was that no fuel was consumed while flying.
It is shocking.
It is also shocking that on land, Carlos asked a question in English to Rafael, and it turns out Rafael didn't speak nor understand English.
Rafael said,
After flying for 15 minutes over the surroundings of Mexico City, he was going to land, but when he tried to use the radio, it didn't work. The compass of the airplane was acting up, and he wasn't able to control it at all. He wasn't able to go up or down or right or left. The last thing he remembered before feeling tired and falling asleep was that the airplane started to gain altitude going backwards.
After that, Rafael never flew again, and he was sent by bus back to Mexico City.
Knowing the story of Rafael Pacheco Perez and knowing the story we have told you and will continue to tell you, could it be that the paranormal and extraterrestrial experience are more related than what we think? Let us know in the comments.
Until the next one.